Hi, my name is Saskia Kersten and I'm a senior lecturer in English Language and Linguistics at the University of Hertfordshire. And amongst other modules, I teach two that use Corpus Linguistics to explore language data. One of these modules is called Chunky Language, Investigating Formulaic Sequences, and the other one I co-teach is called Corpus-Based Studies in English Language, and I'm going to explain what the corpus in all of those names means. So in today's tester session, I'm going to talk you through how we can explore language data using corpora. And I've called it Spot the Pattern because that's what we're going to do. And there will be a couple of opportunities for you to have a go yourself. So just follow along and then pause the video, go away, do your little analysis, and then come back to see what I've got to say about it. Okay, so why patterns? Patterns in language occur quite a lot, but we're not necessarily aware of them. So for example, if we look at something like this, a muck of blank, then most of you will probably fill the blank with either tea or coffee. There are of course other options, but those are the ones that come most readily to mind. So tea or coffee would be really good fits for this blank. Or if you hear happy blank, then the most common phrase is happy birthday, for example. Or once upon a blank. So most of you are probably familiar with once upon a time, which is a very, very common phrase to introduce fairy tales, for example. And maybe slightly less obvious is something like blank blank ladies. And what goes in here are two adjectives, for example, little old ladies. And again, it's interesting that it's little old ladies, not old little ladies. So even the word order may play a role here. I don't know whether you're familiar with Nathan Pyle's Strange Planet webcomic series. If you're not, then go away, have a look at his Instagram page so that you get an idea of what I mean by this. So in these webcomics, they're little aliens, and I'm not going to explain the jokes to you, but the jokes, amongst other things, rely on the fact that they talk similar to the way we talk, but they use slightly different words, not what we would use. You can still understand it, but it doesn't sound as familiar. And that's something that we would look at in one of my seminars, where the humor comes from, what exactly he does with language to make it still recognizable and yet slightly unusual and different from how we would say it. So I've used the term corpus a couple of times, so obviously I need to tell you what exactly I mean by this. So a corpus, and the plural is corpora, so one corpus, two or more corpora, is a collection of text used for linguistic analyses. And that is usually stored in the form of an electronic database. So it's a large collection of text that is accessible by a computer. And corpus texts are usually very large. So we've got thousands or even millions of words, and we can search them using a computer program. And what's most important is that these corpus texts are not made up of the linguists or native speakers' invented examples, but they are authentic, naturally occurring spoken and written language. So a corpus, therefore, is a large collection of texts that is searchable, and the software that we use to search a corpus is called a corpus query system, or sometimes referred to as a concordancer. And there are quite a number of these corpus query systems around. Some of them you have to be installed on your computer, some are web-based, and I've listed a couple, and the one that we use at the University of Hertfordshire, because we have got a subscription to it, is one that's called the Sketch Engine. And I'm going to show you a couple of examples with Sketch Engine. Obviously, you can't access it yourself just yet, but there's also an openly available option that you can have play around with, and I'm going to explain how to do that a little bit further along today's taster session. So Corpus Linguistics, again, just to reiterate, refers to the study of machine-readable spoken and written language samples that have been assembled in a principled way for the purpose of linguistics research. So at the heart of empirically based linguistics and data-driven description of language, corpus linguistics, which is what we call the discipline is called corpus linguistics, is concerned with language use in real contexts. So it's language in the wild, as I sometimes call it. So why use a corpus? It's exactly that, because it's language in the wild. It's not what I think about language, but how language is actually used. Because we are notoriously bad at actually reflecting on our own language use, because we've got all those norms and prescriptive ideas of how language should be used, that cloud our judgment of how we actually use language, and we don't pay attention to what comes out of our mouth most of the time anyway, at least not down to the nitty-gritty detail that corpus linguists are interested in. And a corpus search can be really simple, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples, or it can be really complex depending on what we need to do with it. So it keeps pace with your questions as well, which is what I like about it. Now here I've given you two examples of frequency lists. So I've just asked the computer in two different corpora, so two different kinds of text collections, to give me the most frequent words and rank them from the most frequent to the slightly less frequent. And the two corpora I've used are the British Academic Spoken English Corpus, or BASE, and the British Academic Written English, or BAW corpus. And what I'd like you to do is to just pause the video for a second, have a look at these two word lists. So the one that starts at the top left-hand corner and then the one at the bottom. And just have a think if you can work out which one is the spoken English corpus and which one is the written English corpus. So which one is which? Okay, so hopefully you've been able to work it out, and you probably had quite a good idea that the top one is the British Academic Spoken English Corpus, because you may have spotted in position 5 the voiced pause, and obviously a voiced pause is something that wouldn't occur in written language normally. But you may have also spotted, for example, in position 12 and position 29 that there are contractions, and then in position 40 there's another one. So apostrophe s, as in, for example, he's instead of he is, or in position 29 we've got the nt, which is of course the not, as in don't, for example. And then in position 40 we've got f, as in I have, for example, so I've and not I have. The bottom one is the British Academic Written English Corpus, and again what you may have spotted here is that there's a lot of punctuation that's used, so full stops, comma, and especially opening and closing brackets, which is typical for academic written English because we need a lot of brackets for referencing. Apart from that, we also got apostrophe s, but that's probably, we would have to look at it in a bit more detail, but I strongly suspect that this is probably the genitive and not necessarily a contraction. But apart from that, again, the is the most frequent word in both of these corpora, which is not surprising at all, because the is just the most common word in the English language, full stop. But that's one way in which we can explore corpora. What are the most frequent words, and what does that tell us about the underlying corpus, for example? What else can we do? So we've already looked at the most frequent word, that would be rank order. We also can look at raw frequency and relative frequency. So that tells us how many instances of a given word are in a given corpus. And then relative frequency would be what is the percentage of the total number of words that the raw frequency represents. So it would give us something like, statistically speaking, we would expect to encounter word X Y number of times per million words, for example, per million words. We can also look at collocations, so at frequently co-occurring words together, and we can do that using collocation candidates or word sketches. We can also look at the most frequent phrases of a given length that reoccur, and that's usually referred to as an n-gram, sometimes also called a lexical bundle. And we can also explore the frequent grammatical structures in a corpus. So, for example, is something predominantly written in the passive voice, for example. So this is what a concordance looks like. Obviously, I've stripped it of all the other surrounding bits and bobs that are there, but you can't see at the moment, just to give you the bare lines of concordance. So what I've got down the middle in red is the word that I searched for. So I conducted a query, a search in a corpus. In this case, it was the BNC, the British National Corpus, of the word modicum. And this word down the middle is called a quick or a keyword in context, or sometimes it's also referred to as the node word. And then I've got context to the left. And then I've got context to the left, and I've got context to the right. And as you may see, these are not necessarily always complete sentences, because that's not necessary, but it gives us the words that precede the word I searched for and the words that follow the word I searched for. And if you read the lines of concordance, not left to right, but top to bottom, you will already hopefully be able to spot a couple of patterns. So for example, if you look to just the left of the word modicum, you'll see that it's mostly a. We've got a couple of counterexamples. There's a the and a that in there, but in most instances it's a modicum. And then if we look to the right, we can see that in almost all instances it's a modicum of. And then we can see it's almost always a modicum of something. And then we could have a look in more detail at what is the something that follows, for example. And this already brings us to the notion of collocations. And one of the very often quoted quotes here is, "You shall know a word by the company it keeps," because words co-occur together more often than we would expect by chance. So some words just have an affinity to each other, and that's the purely frequency-based definition of collocation. There's also a phraseological definition, which I'm not going to go into. There's something to do with restrictions on substitutability. The references are on the slides if you want to read up more on that kind of collocation. Then have a look at the last slide where I've listed all the references that I've used for this little presentation. So what I've gone away and done is I've asked Sketch Engine to determine collocation candidates for me for a mystery word. So I'm not going to reveal the mystery word, I'm just going to give you the collocation candidates. And they're collocation candidates to one position of the right only. So these are only words that immediately follow our mystery word. So on the next slide, you will see those words, and I want you to work out what the mystery word is. And remember, the mystery word has to be to the left, so it has to precede all of those collocation candidates. So here you can see the collocation candidates from 4 different corpora, the B and C, the N1010-08, which means it's a web-based corpus of English from 2008, the same from 2013, and then I've got another version of this corpus from 2015. So just have a look and see if you can work out which word can precede all of these. And you may have worked out that the word that we're looking for, our mystery word, is smart. And you can also see that it develops through time. So one thing that may have given it away is in the B and C, you may have heard of smart aleck or smart arse, for example. But then we can also see it's smart enough, smart cards. And then, of course, in 2013 and 15, we've also got the smartphone, which didn't exist when the B and C was compiled, incidentally. And we've also got the smart TV and the smart grid. So these are new technologies that have come into existence, and therefore also obviously have shaped the language, because now all of these terms, phone, grid, meter, are very, very common collocations for smart, and there weren't a couple of decades ago. So we can also say something about the representativeness of corpora, because corpora obviously have to be compiled at one point in time, which automatically means that there's a cutoff point when there is no new data added, unless it's a monitor corpus, but that's something different, which I won't go into. So for example, what I've done here is I've done searches for the word, the lemma email, so the dictionary form of email that includes email, emails, emailing, emailed, and all of those, regardless of spelling, so whether it was with a hyphen or without a hyphen. And in the British National Corpus, as you'll see, we only have 236 examples, and that's not very surprising, because the BNC was designed to represent a wide cross-section of British English from the later part of the 20th century, and building of the corpus began in 1991, although the text date from before that as well, but was completed in 1994. So that means no texts newer than 1994 are in this corpus. That's just logic. And of course, in 1994, not that many people used email on a daily basis. If we compare that to the English Web 2015 or N1010-15, that's an English web corpus downloaded by Spiderling in November and December of 2015, which is the newest corpus that we've got on Sketch Engine at the moment. And that gives us more than 3.5 million instances. And if you look at the relative frequency, which is the one given in brackets, you'll see that in the BNC we've got 2 per million. So every million words we would expect to encounter, statistically speaking, email in all its variations 2 times. Whereas, of course, it's much, much more frequent, nearly 200 times per million words in the English Web 2015. And that just shows us that obviously the word email is much more frequently used nowadays than it was 30 odd years ago. There's also SKELL, which is a pared-down version of Sketch Engine. It's mostly intended for language learners, and it's freely available, and that's what I'm going to use for you to have a go at for some of the activities. So I've put the link to SKELL on the slides, so just go there and have a look, and I've also done a little video that explains how that works. So this is just a little video to show you how you can access SKELL and where to find it. So you just go to, for example, Google or a search engine of your choice. Then you search for SKELL, and then you click on the link, and then that brings you to this box, and then in the search box you just type happy about, and then you click on the magnifying glass to search, and that should give you 40 examples of happy being used in context. As you can see, it's not ordered the way I showed you earlier, but you still have the node word, the word that you searched for, the string rather I should say, because it's a phrase, it's not just one word, in red. And then you can look at these 40 examples, and on the next slide I've just copied those 40 examples, and I'm going to explain in a little bit more detail what I want you to do with these examples. So have a look at the examples, listen to the instructions on the next slide, pause the video, and then come back once you've done your analysis, and then I'm going to explain what we can glean from this analysis. Put them here so that you can see. So we've got my 40 examples, and I've also made them a little bit bigger so that you can read them. And I want you to go away and have a look at each of these 40 examples and determine, are people here actually happy about something? Or are they not happy about something? Or can't you tell? Because sometimes you can't tell. So, for example, use a smiley face when people are actually happy about something. Use a frowny face if they're not happy about something. And use nothing or an X or something for all the instances where we can't tell. And once you've done that, come back and I'm going to explain why I want you to do this and what kind of information we can glean from this kind of exercise. Okay, so this is my analysis of these 40 examples, and I've used green for all the examples where people are actually happy about something, and again, slightly bigger so you can see. So for example, in line 1, he was still happy about who had been chosen. So this person, whoever he is obviously happy, the same as in example 2. I'm very happy about my results. But in line 3, I've marked that red because not every artist is happy about the expanded role. So obviously they're not happy. Or in line 7, neither had been entirely happy about it. So again, here somebody is not happy. In line 10, I marked that in yellow because we can't tell. He asked attendees whether they were happy about the upcoming operation, and we don't know because we don't know the answer from this example. And I've done that for the first 20 examples and also for the following 20 examples. And overall, you can see that there is an overall parity with a slight preference for saying that you are not happy about something. I think it's something I have, I should have counted it properly, but I think there's like 20 examples of where somebody's not happy about something to 17 examples where people are actually happy and 3 where we can't be quite sure. So what's interesting about this is that happy about is quite often, if not in the majority of cases, and obviously we don't have enough data to make a definitive analysis here or to make a definitive claim, but in most examples there seems to be a tendency to say that you are not happy about something rather than that you are happy about something. So there seems to be a slight preference for the negative with this phrase. So we also have got something in Sketch Engine that's called a word sketch, which is a summary of the word's behavior. And again, here I've given you the definition of what a word sketch does and what it is from Sketch Engine itself. So a word sketch is a one-page summary of a word's grammatical and collocational behavior, and it shows the word's collocates categorized by grammatical relations, such as words that serve as an object of the verb, words that serve as a subject of the verb, words that modify the word, etc. And what this looks like in your version in SKELL. So again, you can go back to. Okay, so here we've got an example of a word sketch in SKELL, And if you have a look next to the search box, we've got a couple of different options. So we've got examples, which is what we used before, and then we've got word sketch. So click on word sketch and then put donate in the search box and click on the looking glass, and or magnifying glass, or whatever you want to call it, and then you will see this particular screen. So for donate, we've got, for example, the subjects of donate. So for example, donors donate, volunteers donate, businessmen donate, and so on and so forth. The objects that are donated, so for example, proceeds, blood, land, money, funds, acres, organs you can donate, kidneys, more specifically, dollars, sums, items. And I'm using the plural sometimes because it only gives me the lemma form, so the dictionary form. So for example, organs would also be a collocation here. Or we can have trophy or sperm. So all of these are things that are being donated. And if we have a look at this, you might notice that all of these are things that have got value in some shape or form. So we've obviously got money and dollars and things like that. We've got body parts, blood, if you want to count that as a body part, or sperm, and then kidneys and organs. But for example, you wouldn't say, I'm going to donate urine, for example, because urine is a bodily secretion, like blood, for example. Is it a secretion? Well, but you know what I mean. But it doesn't have any value, so it can't be used by someone else. So things that we donate are normally positive things that still have value. That's something that we can glean from this little analysis. And this is linked to something that we call semantic prosody. So semantic prosody is this idea that a given word or phrase may occur frequently in the context of positive words or negative words. Most commonly, the work on semantic prosody has focused on negative associations. And these associations are exploited by speakers to express evaluative meaning covertly. So that's something that we don't do openly, but by choosing certain words that normally co-occur with other negative words, we're already foreshadowing that we'll probably mean something negative, for example. So have a go yourself. Use the word sketch function on SKELL, but have a look at the verb perform and just have a look at what kind of things collocate with perform and whether you can glean anything from that. Okay, so if you've done that, then you may have come up with something like, for example, you perform an operation or a surgery. And this is really interesting because lots of the other examples for perform are, for example, you perform a role, you perform in the theatre, and so on and so forth. And the reason why we use the word perform with surgery and operation is we also talk about an operation theatre, for example. And I don't know whether you've ever seen that in old films, for example, that old operation theatres actually looked like lecture theatres, where you've got the sort of the seating in rows that go up higher and higher and higher, so that all the students can see what happens while the operation is being performed. So these are the kinds of things that tell us something about where words come from as well, and how words are used, and why certain verbs may go with certain nouns, and so on and so forth. Now, just to wrap up, a couple of ideas what else we can do with this. So there's also corpus-assisted discourse studies, which is really interesting. And the aim of corpus-assisted discourse studies is to uncover in a discourse type understudy, for example, in newspaper articles or in novels or in official documents, in policy documents, for example, what we might call, or rather what the authors I'm quoting here call non-obvious meaning. That is meaning which is not readily available to naked eye perusal. So we can uncover hidden covert meaning again. So for example, how ideas about groups and people and race are constructed and discriminated. So Ramesh Krishnamurthy has done some work on that. How refugees and asylum seekers are portrayed in the British press, or how government officials construct their identity, for example. And again, if you want to read up on any of those, the references are all on the last slide. Corpora can also be used to explore literary text in the sense of corpus stylistics. You can have a look at the Click Dickens project from the University of Birmingham. Michaela Malberg, for example, does some work on this. We can map the emergence of words. So again, Ramesh Krishnamurthy and Rainer Grundmann have done some work on climate change. That sometimes it's called global warming, sometimes it's called climate change. And again, who uses what when and in what context is actually really interesting, and now people have taken to calling it a climate emergency, for example. So again, it's about language change over time and what we associate with certain terminology as well. It can obviously help us with our own writing for both native and non-native speakers. I use corpora all the time if I'm not quite sure whether something sounds good or is actually used in that way. It can also be used to scaffold foreign language learning, which is the prime use of SKELL that you've already looked at. So this is to provide examples for learners of English so that they get a feel for how the language is used. And you can explore language in any other context imaginable. So for example, I've done some research on the language of Twitter using corpora. We've looked at policy documents with a colleague of mine from education. And you can build your own corpora, which is something that we've done for those two examples. And it gets really interesting because you can work with language really almost at the click of a button, but then of course the interpretation and the questions you ask are something that the computer cannot tell you. And that's where we come in, and that's what you're going to learn if you study English Language and Linguistics at the University of Hertfordshire. So here are the promised references. I hope you enjoyed this little taster session. If you've got any questions, don't hesitate to contact me. My email address is on the very first slide, and I hope to see you soon at the University of Hertfordshire. Bye.